After the bombshell release of the Epstein files these past few weeks, one of the biggest takeaways now is that the FBI reportedly could not find any evidence that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked girls to others, to the rich, to the powerful, to the...
Hold on, because if that's accurate, it blows up one of the biggest narratives in modern scandal history. For years, the public story wasn't just that Epstein abused girls. It was that he supplied them to powerful men, to elites, to people whose names would shake governments. So if the FBI is now saying there's no proof of that, that's not just a legal detail. That's seismic.
elite. Now, many of you might be saying, what? How can that be true? Is that really true? Let's try to get to the bottom of it. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, before we jump into this, have you heard the breaking news? A recent report from Forbes shows that employees who use AI at work, they're earning 40% more than those who don't. Yeah, AI is changing employment, and right now it really matters because the early adopter phase, that's over. So the question is simple. Are you going to watch this shift or are you going to win from it? Outskill is the first ever AI-focused educational platform for AI learning, and they are hosting a 2-day AI mastermind training live this Saturday and Sunday, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern, and right now is the perfect time to join because you can get in free for the next 48 hours. This 16-hour AI training has already built 10 million plus AI professionals across all industries, and by the way, is rated 4.9 stars on Trustpilot. You're going to learn to build AI agents that plan, write, and execute for you, automate workflows, connect tools like Sheets and emails to create systems, get a boost at work with the hours that you save, and you're going to learn to profit from those skills. People from this training have launched AI services that bring in $2,000 to $3,000 a week. You're also going to get the AI Prompt Bible, the AI Profit Roadmap, a personal AI toolkit builder, and the 2026 AI Survival Hackbook. This is a guide of upcoming AI shifts and steps to take to be prepared. Now, seats are limited. Use the link in the description to join, plus join our WhatsApp community to stay updated. As someone who's been following all aspects of the Epstein saga, particularly the latest release of the Epstein files pursuant to the Epstein Files Transparency Act, the question I keep asking is, could someone else have been prosecuted? I mean, that's one of the big questions, right? Is there evidence that Jeffrey Epstein was trafficking girls to other powerful men? Well, according to the Associated Press's review of the files, the FBI says no. And we looked into it too, and based on some of the files we found, it seems that's true, that the FBI says there's no evidence. That the FBI, they looked at the bank records, they looked at emails, they interviewed victims, they searched Epstein's properties, and there is no evidence that he trafficked girls to other people. Even though, by the way, he was brought up on sex trafficking of minors charges, and then Ghislaine Maxwell was subsequently charged and convicted in her own trial. She was convicted essentially of trafficking victims to just Jeffrey Epstein. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and we know that Epstein died before going to trial. But it's always been, it was just to him, that he wasn't farming out or lending out girls or women to other people. Now, according to this new article from the Associated Press, the FBI claims there was no videos, no photos from his places in New York, Florida, the Virgin Islands, Jeffrey Epstein's island, nothing depicting any other people abusing these girls, these victims. Here's actually a good way to describe it. There is this email to then Deputy Director of the FBI, Dan Bongino. The sender is redacted, we can't see that, but this is dated March 20th, 2025, and it states, the case agents and AUSAs, that's Assistant United States Attorneys.
And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. The FBI is saying, we looked everywhere. 1 million files, devices, photos, surveillance, and we didn't find proof tying other people to abuse. Legally, that matters. Publicly, that's a whole different story.
Ensure that all videos and images from the case file and from Epstein's residences and devices were reviewed for evidence of a crime. Those reviews revealed no evidence from any of the searches we conducted or any of the files we reviewed that any videos or other images exist of any victims in this case being sexually abused. Nor did those reviews reveal any evidence that anyone other than Epstein and Maxwell participated in the sexual abuse of victims in this case. We are aware of the theory circulated in the media and online that Epstein video recorded the abuse of his victim, including by other men, but we have found no evidence to support that theory. Indeed, Had we found such videos, we certainly would have used them as evidence in the criminal cases we investigated and prosecuted, and would have pursued any leads they generated. We did not, however, locate any such videos. Below, please find more details about the video evidence gathered during this investigation. During the searches of Epstein's New York residence and USVI residence in 2019, United States Virgin Islands, the FBI searched for videos and surveillance cameras. My understanding from the case agent is that there were no cameras found inside any bedrooms or living areas of either residence. I understand that surveillance cameras were located near the entrances of the residences. I also understand that the surveillance systems only retain video for a limited period of days, and that the only recordings available were very recent surveillance from 2019 and would thus not have depicted anything relevant to our investigation, which focused on the 1990s and early 2000s. Accordingly, those surveillance videos were not seized because they were not responsive to the warrants allowing the FBI to seize only certain evidence from those premises. The FBI had no legal authority to seize recent surveillance videos from 2019 under the warrants issued by SDNY and USVI courts. During the searches of Epstein's residences in 2019, the FBI seized a large number of CDs, some hard copy photographs, and at least one videotape containing nude images of females, some of whom appeared to possibly be minors in their late teens. The case agents reviewed all of those images, and they were all made available to Maxwell's counsel for review and discovery. None of the images depicted sexual abuse, and none depicted any males with any of the nude females. Some of these images included nude photographs of victims who were the focus of Maxwell's trial, and we marked some of those photographs as sealed exhibits for trial. The victims are alone in these photos. Because those images contain sensitive photos of victims of sexual abuse, they have never been released publicly. As I referenced in my email to you this morning, the FBI and SDNY, Southern District of New York prosecutors, the FBI and the SDNY undertook a full review of all electronic devices seized from Epstein's residences and incident to his arrest in 2019. As part of that review, a team of FBI agents, FBI analysts, SDNY AUSAs, and SDNY paralegals divided up the review of over 1 million images and videos that FBI CART extracted from Epstein's devices. The reviewers all followed the same protocol for the review, which involved at least one member of the review team personally reviewing each image and video extracted from each device and determining whether the image or video was responsive to the search warrants in the case. In an effort to be as broad as possible, the protocol directed reviewers to identify as responsive, among other things, any image or video depicting any female who appeared to be under the age of 30. As a result of that review, any image or video on any of Epstein's devices depicting any potential victim was identified as responsive and saved. The case agent collected and maintained a copy of all images and videos identified responsive through this search. Attached, please find the index detailing how many images and videos were identified responsive to the warrants and what designation they received under the protective order in the Maxwell case. Note that materials designated highly confidential contained nudity. Please also note that this index does not include Epstein's iPhone and 6 iPads, which were reviewed on Cellbrite using the same protocol for videos and images described above. Although that review identified many images and videos that were responsive to the warrants in our criminal investigation, none depicted the sexual abuse of any victim, and none revealed any perpetrator or perpetrators of sexual abuse other than Epstein and Maxwell. The Palm Beach Police Department video recorded interviews of victims at the police station. Video recorded parts of their search of Epstein's Palm Beach residence and also seized a small number of videos from Epstein's Palm Beach residence. All of those videos were transferred to the FBI's custody, are part of the case file, and were reviewed by the AUSAs and case agents during our investigation. None of these videos depict the abuse of any victims or provide evidence suggesting anyone other than Epstein and Maxwell participated in the abuse of victims. SDNY introduced the video recording of the search of Epstein's Palm Beach residence as an exhibit at trial. None of the videos identified above contained potential CSAM, child sexual abuse.
This phrase right here, not enough evidence to charge. That's legal language doing a lot of heavy lifting. It doesn't mean innocent. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. It means prosecutors don't believe they can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And in federal court, if you miss that standard, you lose. Period.
Next material. As noted above, there was no videos of any sexual abuse identified at any point in the investigation. There were, however, approximately a dozen photographs containing CSAM found on one of Epstein's devices. Those images were identified by the case agent as CSAM that Epstein obtained over the internet, not CSAM depicting any of Epstein's victims or produced by Epstein. A copy of those images was maintained by the case agent in the case file with the other images and videos seized and identified responsive during the review of Epstein's devices detailed above. Okay, here's another memo. Quote, in September 2019, FBI and SDNY met with victim, redacted. FBI and SDNY were able to verify that Maxwell recruited her and that she was being sexually abused by Epstein and Maxwell and that she recruited other minors. FBI and SDNY were not able to corroborate or verify her reports of being lent out to other men. Her statements regarding being directed to have sex with other men was inconsistent with statements made by other victims and witnesses, in particular her statements regarding being lent out to men with another victim. The other victim denied this occurring. Now, in the spirit of that, there is a July 10th, 2025 email titled, quote, response to director's call. So you wonder if this is FBI Director Kash Patel. And all the names are redacted, but it says, how many victims alleged other men or women abused them? Approximately 4 to 5 victims accused other adult men sexually abused them. There was not enough evidence to federally charge these individuals, so the cases were referred to local law enforcement. Approximately 4 to 5 victims accused other adult women to have taken part in sexual abuse, threesome with the minor, including Epstein's girlfriend, who was approximately 18 to 20 years of age at the time. The girlfriend was interviewed, proffered, but it was determined there was not enough evidence to charge. Now, who that girlfriend could be, I can speculate. I'm not going to say here, but let me go add this. There's a 2019 memo regarding co-conspirators or potential co-conspirators. Like, for example, French model scout Jean-Luc Brunel, who was accused of abusing women out in Europe. He died by his own hand, by the way, while awaiting trial. Here's what the memo says. Jean-Luc Brunel, owner of MC Model Agency, SDNY, is currently in contact with his attorneys and a subpoena has been served. There is limited evidence regarding his involvement. What about Les Wexner? We've talked about him before, the retail guru behind Victoria's Secret, Abercrombie & Fitch. Apparently, Epstein managed his finances at one point. He's always come up as a known associate. Quote, Leslie Wexner resides in Ohio. SDNY is currently in contact with his attorneys and a subpoena has been served. There is limited evidence regarding his involvement. Now, all of this may be very surprising and shocking when you consider the breadth of accusers who have come forward against Epstein and, of course, Epstein's connections to the rich and the powerful, and especially when we consider how many emails there are where Epstein or Maxwell converse with these individuals. And let me tell you, some of them are incredibly disgusting and creepy communications. We've covered it here on Sidebar. There has been fallout. But it doesn't mean that if you knew him or talked with him or hung out with him, that you were necessarily involved in criminal activity or even knew about criminal activity, or that there could be a successful prosecution against you. There might not be enough evidence, but obviously this conclusion by the FBI is very surprising. Now, to be clear, as outlined by the AP, there was evidence that the feds were potentially building cases against alleged co-conspirators. The big issue is a lot of those allegations couldn't be verified. And that includes, and I'm not sure if that memo I read before was referring to the late Virginia Roberts Giuffre. It might.
So-called client list. The mythical black book people believed would detonate reputations overnight. According to the FBI, it doesn't exist, at least not in the way the internet imagined. An address book? Yes. A documented roster of trafficked clients? They say no. And that distinction is everything in a courtroom.
Have been, because despite claiming that Epstein had coordinated her to be engaged in sex acts with other men, including former Prince Andrew, the files show investigators thought there was a credibility issue, even though they believed she was a victim of Epstein himself. They cite a memo that said no other victim was described being expressly directed by either Maxwell or Epstein to engage in sexual activity with other men. According to the AP, when investigators looked at Epstein's bank records, there was no evidence either. For example, yeah, they found payments to all of these models, but there wasn't evidence that he was engaging in prostitution of girls or women to other men. And then we have the client list, right? This idea that circulated that Epstein kept this little black book of everyone he trafficked girls to, right? You look at the AP, they correctly note that this was confusing because Attorney General Pam Bondi told Fox News in February of 2025, when she just got into the position, that the client list was, quote, sitting on my desk right now. But then it was only a few months later in July when the FBI and the DOJ issued a memo stating that after they reviewed all of the Epstein materials, this systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. And that is further amplified in a December 30th, 2024 communication. All the names are redacted, but the memo does address what's known as CACHTU. This is the FBI's Crimes Against Children and Human Trafficking Unit, okay? I'll just call it the unit. So it goes like this. This is the email. Quote, The deputy asked whether our investigation to date indicates the client list, often referred to in the media, does or does not exist. Here's the response. This CACHTU, this unit, spoke to the case agent and confirmed no client list existed. An address book was entered into evidence at trial, but it is not a client list as depicted in the media. The current status of the investigation into Epstein is concluded, and the case is pending inactive. Now, the address book being something that has been in the public for quite some time. This is Epstein's contact list. Again, to be clear, doesn't mean that those people were involved in criminal activity of any kind. But obviously, this is a big conclusion. This is a big development. This is something people have been waiting for. I want to talk about it a little bit more. Can we believe this? Is there something going on behind the scenes? Let's talk about it. Let me bring in former federal prosecutor Rena Paul. Rena, thank you so much for taking the time. Does this conclusion from the FBI based on these communications, does this surprise you that there's no evidence that anybody else had been abusing girls, that Epstein hadn't trafficked any of these victims to anybody else?
Well, I think we should start by talking about this as an investigation, right? And to understand what has come out, to think about it through the lens of an investigation by the government and the disclosures by the government as conclusions rather than the raw evidentiary material. So we're starting there. So when you ask if it's surprising, I mean, I think we have to start with the question of what we are actually seeing.
Okay, and so based on what we're seeing in these releases and based on what we're seeing in these internal communications and emails where they say, we can't find any photos or videos of women or girls being abused by anybody other than Maxwell and Epstein, there are those who will say, how is that possible? Unless it was all rumors, unless, of course, Epstein never kept the cameras in those rooms, or he never had any evidence of anybody. He wouldn't record them. Let's just start there.
Yeah. So it seems from what I've reviewed that there's notes of there being sexually explicit material, or CSAM, as they call it.
Here's the psychological twist. If Epstein really was orchestrating a global blackmail operation, why keep evidence in your own house? Why on your own devices? The smarter move would be compartmentalization, offshore storage, third parties, encryption layers. So either the footage never existed or it was never meant to be found.
In the DOJ, right? So there is definitely digital evidence, it seems, from what has been reported. And in considering what that digital evidence can show, we have to think like an investigator again. So think about what may be on a hard drive, on a computer, on a phone, and what it would mean to prove whether a certain person engaged in a certain act, and whether or not that would be a recorded act, or it would just be the recording of an alleged victim that we would be seeing with no connection to anybody else.
No, of course. And as we said, there's a difference, right? He had apparently this material. It just wasn't of anybody in his homes or in general abusing these individuals. And there could have been a whole case built against him just by having this materials. But again, people would say, is it surprising that Epstein didn't maintain this kind of footage and documentary evidence against other people, unless, of course, no one else engaged in any of the abuse of these women or these girls? Because some people would say he was so rich, he was so powerful, why wouldn't he keep blackmail material, and wouldn't it have been in his possession, and wouldn't it have been accessed by federal prosecutors and authorities if they collected all this evidence from their home? I mean, to be clear, just to set it again, when they looked at all the material, their responsive requests were quite broad. They were looking basically for anything from anybody that was under 30. So I'm going to just assume that, taking that as true, if it was there, they would have found it, and it would have been a part of the criminal cases, or it would have been part of this production release. So now we have to say, maybe Epstein never kept this. And if that's the case, somebody as rich and powerful as him, with his kind of connections, allegations that he had ties to other countries, what have you, I guess he's not the blackmailer that people thought?
Well, it's impossible for us to know, right? We're all speculating on what we're seeing that is released. But in thinking again like an investigator, which is when I'm looking at materials, large volumes of materials, and as someone who has done sex crimes investigations and routinely works on large investigations, you got to think about where evidence would lie. And we are, we're basing what we're talking about on the reporting of what's been reported in media, what's been reported by the DOJ, and that is limited to what has been found. right, or reported to have been found. So where would evidence be stored if you were keeping it as someone who didn't want it to be found? Perhaps there are other places where it could be found and it just wasn't found.
What about the fact that the financial records don't detail any evidence of him engaging in some sort of sex trafficking ring? I even mentioned there was payments to models, but they couldn't be proven that he was soliciting them for prostitution to men. The financial records can sometimes tell a lot of a case. Apparently not here.
Yeah, in many cases they can. It is not my understanding, though I think you're probably well more briefed on the Maxwell case than me, but that during that case, money transactions form the basis of that evidence. Rather, I think that was more of a grooming and recruitment theory, right? And so the question of financial records would really come more into play if there was money that was being exchanged. That's first. And second is, well, what are we talking about when we're talking about financial records again? Thinking like an investigator, we have to think about what a financial record could show us. So just because there's a transaction doesn't necessarily show us what we're looking to find, right? So you have to make sense of what the payments are for. And financial records, we also have to think about what the universe of financial records could be. Are we talking about bank records? Are we talking about crypto records? Are we talking about, what kind of currency and what kind of finances are we talking about? Are we talking about cash? And which would be more traceable and investigatable as a government agency?
And that's fair. And when it came to Maxwell, it was about the idea, right? They would bring these girls in and then they would have them recruit other girls. And that was kind of the network that was being built up. From a prosecutorial point of view, from a legal point of view, somebody's looking at this and saying, wait a minute, I'm looking at these filings and they're identifying certain people or they're redacting certain other people. And they say, there's not enough evidence to charge this person or limited evidence regarding involvement. What does that mean? So for a layperson, what does that mean? Because some people would say, okay, but there's something. Shouldn't they go out and look for more? Shouldn't they begin more thorough investigations? It's not like they're saying they're completely exonerated. It's just we don't have enough to charge or we don't have enough there that they were involved. What does that mean?
When you're talking about an investigation, you have to do an investigation by a standard. So in the criminal system, that standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a very high standard. So conducting an investigation in the criminal sector means, can I find evidence that certain person committed certain crime? And that's a very high standard. Not enough evidence doesn't mean no evidence. It just means that the person who is reviewing the evidence has made the decision that that evidence does not support a specific charge, that they were seeking to charge a specific person.
By the way, why, if you have alleged victims say, hey, I was lent out to other men, I was trafficked, why is that not enough? When they say there's maybe issues in the credibility, they couldn't find corroborating evidence, explain to me how that works in terms of investigating claims like that.
Yeah, so it certainly is enough for an alleged victim to say what happened to them. That is a very important piece of evidence when we talk about investigating trafficking or sexual cases. And often, as we all know, sexual assault cases occur in a place where there are two people that are in the place, the person who is the alleged victim and the person who is the alleged perpetrator. And so the words of that alleged victim are always important, not the least of which is a question about consent, coercion, what they experienced. All of that is critical, particularly if a trafficking case involves, as we saw that it did in the Diddy case, an element of coercion, right? So you need the person who was experiencing it to explain that and what they were experiencing. But that
hesitation, that's honest lawyering, because we're not looking at raw evidence. We're looking at summaries of evidence written by the very people who decided what to charge. And in high-profile cases like this, transparency and trust don't always travel together.
Testimony alone can definitely be enough depending on what we're talking about, but we also have to talk about the corroboration of what someone says. So as an investigator, when you are building a case around two people saying different things, you look to evidence that could corroborate one or the other side of what they're saying, and trying to find out if there's certain circumstantial evidence, as they would say, and as opposed to direct evidence, which is the person saying the thing, of what to corroborate what the person is saying.
And it's complicated when it said in one of the memos, no other victim has described being expressly directed by either Maxwell or Epstein to engage in sexual activity with other men. That stood out to me. I mean, what was your take on that?
These are summaries and not the underlying case file. So what we're we are all left to make conclusions off of summaries rather than, there's a rule in the law called the best evidence rule, when you want to look at the original thing. So we're not looking at the original evidence. We're looking at the summary of somebody saying what the evidence is and what they are interpreting that evidence to be. So because they're conclusions, that's one aspect. The other piece is that by definition, from the reporting, there's material that's not included. Well, we know there's redactions, right? And there's material that is not being produced, the CSAM material, for example. So we're being asked to interpret an incomplete record here, and it's hard to make conclusions based on that.
I'm going to put you in a very difficult position, but I have to ask it because everybody's going to wonder. They're going to say, oh, this is a cover-up. They're going to say that I can't believe these memos. I can't believe these communications. They make the argument. Maybe the people who wrote them knew that it would be produced one day, so they were creating a record to say, hey, there's nothing here. There's nothing here. Can we believe that these memos, these communications, these case summaries are accurate?
I don't have an answer. I think
that's an answer in and of itself. The fact that you can't say, of course, Jesse, of course they're accurate. Of course it would be. What's your reservation?
I mean, I think we are all speculating around information that is being received from various sources, right? So we're all drawing conclusions about incidents that happened that none of us looked into directly, and we're not seeing the totality of the evidence of. So it's really hard to say.
Here's the thing, though.
Conclusions we can draw.
For those materials that were not turned over in the Epstein release, right, that were part of an exception, they would jeopardize an active investigation. It would endanger national security, things that were not part of these millions of pages of documents that came out. That still was reviewed by federal authorities. Would I be wrong in saying they came to that conclusion, assuming it's all accurate, they came to that conclusion by looking at all that material that even wasn't part of the public release, right? There's not like somebody could say, well, they're making a conclusion based on not everything. I mean, what about the stuff that would endanger national security? The Fed still had to look at that and make the point, we can't turn this over to endanger national security. So if taking everything is true, they are in their analysis, they are in their case summary, they are in their conclusions saying, yeah, we looked at all the stuff we can't even turn over to you and we still don't see anything there, right? I'm not wrong about that, or maybe I'm wrong about that.
I think it's unusual to have such highly sensitive evidence turned over to the public in the first place.
Right.
We usually get such evidence as the public through trials where someone goes to trial and evidence comes out during that trial. So this is very unusual. And in terms of the machinations of the decision making around who to charge and what to charge, those are also often things we as the public don't have access to. So we get the information when a charge is brought, right? So we see the indictment was brought. And also remember that goes also through a grand jury as well, which is another secret proceeding. So it's very unusual to be even commenting about and speculating about what's behind the scenes of an investigation like this. And we're sort of left to best practices as investigators, best practices as people who have looked at the law and are trying to charge in a criminal system and what that means. And so, yeah, it's very hard to draw conclusions.
This is unusual that we're kind of seeing the inner workings, the thought process of the feds and prosecutors. I mean, not to get political, but one of the times that we saw this was the Mueller report and Bill Barr and whether or not the evidence there would to support charges, right? It's rare to see this. But it does bring me to what's happening, I think, starting today. It was announced that members of Congress can review the unredacted Epstein files at the DOJ Monday through Friday. Are they going to go in and say, wait a minute, I'm looking at this and I'm disagreeing with the FBI case summaries. I'm going this and say, wait a minute, I see people, I see names, I think you could charge X, Y, and Z. You could investigate X, Y, and Z. Is that something we should be looking out for? I don't know.
I don't know either. I mean, I think one of the biggest pieces of this is that the person at the center of it is deceased.
Yeah.
And so there won't be charges brought against him because he's no longer with us. So, that's also different than cases that we've seen that have similar evidence, similar seeming evidence or similar seeming charges.
It's such an interesting situation. All right. I don't think it's going to end the conversation. We'll continue to follow it. Rena Paul, thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. We're also up on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Fridays, 11 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you next time, everybody.